In today's video, I have managed to get my hands on two of my favorite four-door performance sedans. On this side, we have the 2018 Infiniti Q50 with the 300 horsepower turbo engine under the hood, and the all-new Kia Stinger with the 365 horsepower 3.3-liter twin-turbo under its hood. The Infiniti Q50 has long been a favorite of mine in the compact luxury sedan category, not just because this is a little bit bigger than a 3 Series or a C-Class, but also because for BMW 330 kind of money, you could get a 3-liter twin-turbo 6-cylinder engine with more power under the hood than you can in that BMW. And that's basically the same value proposition that we have over here with the Kia. Because interestingly enough, these two models are priced almost identically. This Q50 is $2,000 less expensive than this Kia right here, but that's mainly because this Kia has all-wheel drive, which is a $2,000 option, and this vehicle does not, which is also about a $2,000 option. So if you remove that one option, they're basically the same price. And yet for that same price, we actually get more power under the Kia's hood. Most luxury vehicles in America opt for very simple and restrained styling, and the more adventurous styling that we see in the Q50 is one of the things that I have always loved about this model. For 2018, they have given it a nip tuck and a slightly different front end than before. We still have full LED headlamps on either side in this particular model. As with the Infiniti, the Kia designers were definitely not restrained. We have very aggressive headlamp modules, again full LED modules over here as well, functional air vents on either side, and this large and aggressive Kia designed grille. They call this the Tiger Nose design, and I'm kind of surprised how well this works on SUVs, crossovers, the Kia Soul, and even the Kia Stinger. It's basically the same design, they just sort of nip and tuck it and make it fit each vehicle. Although the Q50 is one of the longer compact luxury cars in America, overall length is one of the big differences between the Q50 and the Kia Stinger. Because the Stinger isn't really a compact luxury car. It's sort of a tweener vehicle. In terms of overall dimensions, the Stinger slots somewhere between the Audi A4 and the Audi A6. That means that even if you were to compare the Stinger to some of the longer entries in this particular group, like the 4 Series Grand Coupe or the Audi A5 Fastback, this is still going to be a decent amount longer. The difference in length isn't just the body, however, it's also the wheelbase. The distance between the front tires and the back tires is larger in the Stinger than it is in the Q50 or, again, most compact luxury cars. When you look at the side profile, there's another big difference between the two vehicles, and that is that the Stinger has a liftback or a fastback or a sportback, whatever it is you want to call this hatch. This is why there are a lot of comparisons between the Kia Stinger and the BMW Grand Coupe or the Audi A5 Sportback, because again, this has a sort of sedan profile, but what looks like a trunk lid and the rear window open as one piece. Diving under the hoods, things are perhaps a little bit more similar than they are different, because both vehicles use brand new twin-turbo V6 engines. This uses a brand new 3-liter twin-turbo V6, whereas the Kia uses a brand new 3.3-liter twin-turbo engine. Kia's engine produces 365 horsepower and over 370 pound-feet of torque, whereas this twin-turbo V6 over here produces 300 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. Now, if you want more power, you can get the Q50 Red Sport, which gets a 400 horsepower version of this same engine, but it's going to cost you more. And again, these two vehicles are suspiciously the same price, and so we're not talking about the Red Sport in this particular video. Both vehicles send their engine's power to the rear wheels by default, although all-wheel drive is available on both cars. Infiniti uses a 7-speed automatic transmission to get the power to the back, whereas Kia uses a brand new 8-speed automatic. One big difference worth noting is that in top-end GT2 trims of the Stinger, we get a mechanical limited slip differential in the back, and you can't get a factory limited slip differential at all in the Q50. One thing you'll also notice while we're under the hood is overall engine position. Because these are rear-wheel drive vehicles, the majority of the engine and the entire transmission is behind the front axle in both cars. That really helps improve the weight balance when you compare either of these to something like an Acura TLX. For basically the same MSRP, Infiniti gives us some Dunlop Rudd flat tires and Infiniti branded performance brakes up front, whereas Kia goes all in on Michelin Pilot Sport tires and Brembo brakes up front and in the back. Since we're driving the all-wheel drive Stinger this week, this particular model has the same size tires in the rear as up front. When it comes to front seat comfort, the Stinger wins over the Q50 because we have more range of motion in the driver's seat. We have a standard 4-way adjustable lumbar support. Since we're in the top-end trim, we also get inflatable side bolsters and a power-extending thigh cushion. Although the front passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat, it does have more range of motion than we find in the Q50. Both of the models that we're testing have a power tilt telescopic steering column that is memory linked to a 2-position memory on the door. Moving over to the Q50, we find less legroom than we found in the Stinger, which is logical because this is a shorter vehicle overall. But I had expected to find more headroom back here, and that's not actually the case. In both vehicles, my head is touching the ceiling, and I have to slouch just a little bit in order to sit upright back here. I would actually rate headroom identical between the two models. The longer length of the Stinger means that if I move over to the right side of the car, we get more room in that Kia than we find over here in the Infiniti. There are a few touches in the back of the Stinger that we don't find in the Infiniti, for instance a 12-volt power port and a USB charge port, and the ability to change the temperature of the air coming out of these vents. This is not quite a 3-zone climate control, but it is very similar. Because of the lift-back design that we find in the Stinger, we get about 10 cubic feet more cargo capacity in this vehicle than we find in the Infiniti. The Infiniti's trunk is a little bit on the small side for the compact luxury segment because of the overall design of the vehicle, especially the vehicle's rear suspension. That means I was only able to fit 3 of these 24-inch roller bags back here in the Infiniti, but you'll notice that we can actually fit 4 of them right here in the Stinger. If I pop that like that, you can actually put another one right on top there and still close the cargo lid. With the roller bags in the cargo area, both vehicles have a little bit of room between the bags and the back of the trunk, but there wasn't enough in the Q50 to fit a carry-on style 22-inch roller bag, although we could do that in the Stinger. If we lift up the Stinger's load floor, we find a little bit of extra storage, and we actually find a spare tire, which is something that we don't see in the Q50 or actually many luxury cars in America. The real party trick in the Stinger, of course, is when you fold down the rear seats. Now, they don't fold completely flat with the cargo area in the back, but this is still much more practical than your average sedan in America because this opening is quite a bit larger. Taking a look at the inside of the Kia first, you'll notice that the overall style is perhaps a little bit sportier than we find in the Infiniti Q50. Instead of standard wood trim, we find standard aluminum trim inside the Stinger, although not everything that you see is actually metal. For instance, the door release handle right there, and of course the door grab handle, are both plastic. The real aluminum extends to the rear doors as well as the front, and we have more stitched pleather on those rear door panels as well. Because we're in the top end trim, we have a Harman Kardon audio system with real aluminum speaker grates in the front and rear doors. Kia chose to use a joystick-style transmission shifter, and then in the center console we find the drive mode selector, electronic parking brake, heated and cooled seat buttons, and of course a padded center armrest between the front seats. The steering wheel is a sporty flat bottom design, but we do still find a hard plastic airbag cover. The biggest difference when it comes to infotainment, of course, is that we get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto ability inside the Kia, and you don't find that in the Infiniti at this time. That said, of course, we don't have the larger 2-screen system that we find in the Infiniti, and these menus are exactly the same as every other Kia vehicle in America. So if you're looking for something that's just a little bit more special, this wouldn't necessarily be it. When we take a look at the interior of the Infiniti, we find parts uniformity that is perhaps a little bit higher than in the Kia. Now, it's not to say that all of these parts are better quality than what we find inside the Stinger, but all of these parts are a little bit better matched in terms of their quality in relation to one another. The material that's used on the upper portion of the doors, as well as on the inset portion of the doors and the armrest below, match one another just a little bit better. As we move from the doors on over to the dashboard, we find that same consistency in parts quality, although again, not all of these parts are necessarily better than what we find in the Kia. For instance, we still find harder plastics lower on the dashboard that is very, very typical in all compact luxury sedans. Instead of borrowing an infotainment system from one of Nissan's mainstream vehicles, Infiniti chose to design their own 2-screen infotainment and navigation system. This offers a variety of different input methods, from a scroll wheel in the center consoles. You can see I'm zooming the map in right there using that wheel. You can also use controls on the steering column, or you can touch both screens. The 2-screen layout gives us a little bit more flexibility than a single-screen layout. You can adjust your climate control or view various vehicle apps at the same time as you're viewing your navigation map above. Moving down the center console in the Infiniti, we don't find a joystick-style shifter. This is a more traditional mechanical shifter. Drive all the way to the back, manual mode over here to the left side. Behind that, we find the controller for the infotainment and navigation system, and then the drive mode selector toggle. Although Infiniti does make a flat-bottom steering wheel, the Q50 does not get that particular design. Instead, we have a round model with sport grips up top, paddle shifters behind, and a hard plastic airbag cover. As you'd expect with 365 horsepower under the hood, the Stinger is properly quick. We clocked 0 to 60 in this all-wheel drive model in 4.62 seconds. That is about 1/10 of a second faster than Kia's quoted time. The Q50, on the other hand, came in at 5.3 seconds. I expect the rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive Q50 3.0Ts to deliver basically the same 0 to 60 time. The reason for that is that although the all-wheel drive model is going to be a little bit heavier, you get slightly improved traction, and there is just a tiny bit of rear wheel slip right at the beginning of the launch in the Q50. Launching the vehicles is the area where they are different, because this vehicle feels a little bit more muted in first gear. First gear is not quite as deep as the first gear that we find in the Infiniti, but after that, this really takes off. Tires obviously have a huge effect on traction, and that is something that we see when you compare this to the Infiniti, because the Infiniti is a little bit lighter, but it actually takes longer to stop from 60 miles an hour back to zero at 118 feet versus 109 feet for the Stinger. That's because this does come standard with those Michelin Pilot Sport tires. The tire choice also has a big effect on handling, because this is the better handling vehicle when compared to the Q50. That said, it's important not to confuse handling ability with handling feel, because I think handling feel is a little bit superior in the Q50. However, interestingly enough, handling feel and steering feel are not exactly the same thing either. Whether we're talking about the standard electric assist system in the Q50 or the optional direct adaptive steering, it's not quite as engaging as the steering that we find in the Stinger. In terms of overall dynamics and feel, the Q50 comes across as the sportier option. The chassis is more stable, it definitely doesn't have as much body roll as we find in the Stinger, and the Stinger in certain situations, especially when you're driving this hard in corners, can get a little bit of rear end lift that we definitely don't see in the Infiniti Q50. Now again, that said, the Q50 does not hold the road as well as the Stinger does. Now, I think if you were to put the same tires on the Kia and on the Infiniti, that the Infiniti might outhandle the Stinger. It would be close, however, because the Infiniti does not seem to have as good of a weight balance as we find in the Stinger. Depending on the version of the Q50 that you're looking at, it could have about 55 or even close to 60% of the weight on the front axle, and by all accounts, the Stinger is a little bit better balanced than that. Hopping into the Q50, you'll definitely notice a few differences right away. The Q50 feels a little bit smaller, it feels a little bit tighter. Even though the steering ratio in this vehicle doesn't seem to be quite as quick as what we see in the Stinger, it feels just a little bit more direct. Although again, steering feel is actually slightly better in the Kia Stinger. The other thing you'll notice right away is the ride quality. Now, both the Kia and this Infiniti have adaptive suspensions, but the suspension physical components and the adaptive components are tuned quite differently. This suspension is much firmer than what we see in the Stinger, whether we're putting this in the standard mode or Sport Plus. This suspension does a good job of soaking up large bumps, but the smaller bumps are definitely transmitted into the cabin. It doesn't help that this vehicle also has run-flat tires because we don't have a spare tire in the back. Run-flat tires, by their very design, tend to be a little bit firmer and transmit a little bit more of those small imperfections into the cabin. That's definitely what we're seeing in the Q50. Possibly because of those run-flat tires, cabin noise is also a little bit louder in the Q50. This came in at 71 decibels versus 69 decibels for the Stinger. Speaking of noises, I think this 3-liter twin-turbo engine has a slightly better exhaust note than what we see in the Stinger. It is important to keep in mind that Kia offers a digitally manipulated exhaust note in the Stinger. It's available in 2 different levels. You can also turn it completely off if you want to. It's a fairly believable digital exhaust note, but if you're concerned about how your vehicle sounds on the outside, then this is definitely still going to sound better. Oddly enough, the Stinger and the Q50 have nearly identical EPA ratings, and when driving these vehicles roughly the same back-to-back on the same courses, we've been getting roughly the same fuel economy, although this has been just a little bit higher than the Kia. Over a week of mixed driving, we've been averaging about 21 miles per gallon in this Q50. Keep in mind this is rear-wheel drive, and about 20.5 in the Kia. Keep in mind that one's all-wheel drive. So I suspect if you got the rear-wheel drive Kia or the all-wheel drive Q50, they would be right about the same. It's been really interesting driving the Stinger and the Q50 back-to-back, because I really liked the Q50 Red Sport, and that was one of my favorite cars in 2016, and the Stinger has now taken its place for 2017. The two vehicles are similarly priced, but they are a little bit different when it comes down to the details, and that's why I like the Stinger just a little bit more than the Q50 out on the road. The Q50 is the more engaging, more sporty option without a doubt because of the suspension tune and the directness of this 7-speed automatic transmission. But I actually like the slightly more relaxed, slightly more comfortable style of the Stinger, and the fact that it still goes 0 to 60 faster than this 3.0t model of the Q50. The all-new Stinger really punches above its weight. We get faster acceleration than we find in the Infiniti Q50, again, for the same price, because you can go faster in the Q50, but we're talking about same priced models. The Kia also handles better. We get a little bit more rear legroom, more cargo room, more power under the hood. and a few gadgets and goodies that we don't find available in the Q50, like the limited slip-rear differential and Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support. We also get slightly more comfortable front seats and a more adjustable passenger seat. And of course, in addition to all of that, the Kia offers a longer powertrain warranty than we find over here in the Infiniti Q50. Now, that doesn't mean that the Q50 is a bad buy, because the Q50 has long been one of my favorites in the compact luxury sedan segment. That is perhaps the key difference between the two vehicles. The Infiniti is a luxury vehicle with a luxury brand on it. The Stinger is a vehicle that is difficult to categorize, and because of its rear drive nature, often ends up being compared to luxury sedans like this Infiniti Q50. But we don't find exactly the same thing going on. We don't find the luxury car dealer experience, and we don't find the level of customization available in the Q50. For instance, if you want the blue exterior in the GT2 package like we're driving right here, you can only get the off-white interior. If you want this gorgeous red paint color, then you can only get the black interior on the GT2. We get much more variation available in the Q50, and you can also get real wood trim over here in this model as well. This level of variation is pretty normal among mainstream car brands, whereas the Infiniti Q50 again is a luxury car brand, so we get more of that ability to customize the vehicle and mix and match exterior, interior colors, options, etc. And that's why we see more options and packages and trim levels available in the Q50, whereas over here on the Stinger, we just get GT, GT1, and GT2, 3 different trim levels with the 3.3-liter twin-turbo engine. Now, it's worth noting that not all exterior and interior color combinations are the same between those 3 different trim levels. Although the Stinger wins this comparison, there are a few reasons that you might want to get the Q50 instead. If you value a firmer suspension and a slightly sportier overall suspension tuning, then the Q50 is definitely going to be an option for you. And of course, if you prefer a luxury branded vehicle and a luxury brand dealer experience, the Infiniti is going to give you that. The Kia definitely won't. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Be sure and check out those related videos down there at the bottom of your screen. There'll be a video on the 2018 Kia Stinger GT2 all-wheel drive coming up very soon, and one on the 2018 Infiniti Q50 3.0t as well. You can also find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, and if you want to support this channel, head over to patreon.com and find us over there. I'll see you next week.